let's take a look at now what the visual cortex does with this visual information that it's receiving from the retina through the ganglion cells after they have done their part to detect color, as well as the overall shape of an object, and to detect the boundaries of an object. And so there are particular neurons in the visual cortex there are particular neurons in the visual cortex that detect particular features. And so we can take a look at these features and kind of make sense of them. So there are neurons that detect orientation. What I mean by orientation is an object or a particular part of an object vertical, diagonal, horizontal, and so on. So it will have a particular response if the angle of the object fits its preferred orientation. And these are called simple cells. And so simple cells detect an orientation by having a preference for a particular orientation. So there might be one that becomes excited and fires if only the middle in this vertical orientation is detecting an object and not the edges. So this neuron will fire a lot. When it sees this. So if it detects that lit object like that, it will fire quite a bit. If it sees this, the totally opposite, then this particular neuron will become inhibited. And the response will be kind of gradual in between. But basically, it's a neuron that selectively detects vertical lines. And there is a different neuron for each orientation. There are also neurons that respond to the movement. These are called complex cells. And so complex cells respond to a vertical object, not if it's still, but say if it's moving left to right. And so it would respond to a vertical bar moving left to right, and that might make it fire a lot. But it would become inhibited, for example, if the neuron detects that same vertical object moving the opposite direction. In addition to simple cells and complex cells, there are end-stop cells. And they react to size. They detect objects of different size. So you can see how simple cells work, they're getting input from a number of different ganglion cells that are all detecting a vertical column of information from your visual field, and all that information goes to that one simple cell. And then that simple cell would become very excited, for example, when it detects a vertical object, but becomes inhibited when it detects a horizontal object. Complex cells detect movement in a particular direction, so they're going to receive input from a number of ganglion cells that represent different spaces in the visual field, all vertical, for example, but they're going to react if there's movement from one direction to the other. And then the end-stop cells are the ones that detect size, and we can see how they would work here. If the object fits within a small section of its receptive field, it's going to fire a lot. But if the object is bigger than that, it won't fire as much. In other words, it's going to detect an object of a particular size. The final type of feature detecting neuron in the visual cortex that we're going to talk about is involved in responding to a particular type of spatial frequency. An example we can see here, where any image, like this original photograph, can be broken down into either its high frequencies or low frequencies, and of course there are some in between. This is separating out, filtering out the extreme high and the extreme low. So you can see that the low frequencies are kind of the big picture. They provide the big picture, but notice there are no fine lines here, because high spatial frequency refers to the fine lines we see here. And we can see an example here. Here's a high frequency and a lower frequency. And here's another picture, normal picture of the two penguins. High frequencies filtered out, leaving only the low frequencies. So you see the big picture, sort of the high contrast areas, sort of. And then here, the low frequencies are filtered out, leaving only the very fine details. So it has to do with basically how thick the lines, and it's called frequency because there are more cycles or more frequent lines in a high frequency image as opposed to a low frequency image. Now, here's an interesting example. The ambiguity in the Mona Lisa smile is thought to be due to there being two images at the same time. There is a high spatial frequency image and a low spatial frequency image. The left has the low spatial frequency image showing a smile, and the right has a high spatial frequency image showing an expression that is not quite as clear, perhaps. It doesn't seem to engage the cheeks as much or the eyes as much, and it doesn't seem to be quite as happy. So in the visual cortex, we see that there are these 4 different types of feature detecting neurons. And what they do is they look for a particular feature. So simple cells detect the orientation. Complex cells detect the direction of movement. End-stop cells detect size. And then the spatial frequency cells pick up high or low spatial frequencies in what we're looking at. These are all important steps in the process of seeing, and yet they don't let us actually figure out what we're looking at yet. To do that, we're going to have to take a look at other areas of the brain.